Becoming a high value man is a trendy buzzword these days that often comes with the implied promise of fixing all your problems if you simply follow the steps to becoming high value. But when it comes to attracting women and relationship dynamics, it's not as simple as just following a checklist to become high value. And many guys view things through a one-dimensional lens that misses out on critical parts of what attracts women and keeps them attracted to you. So in this video, I want to talk about some of the crucial misconceptions and mistakes that guys make when it comes to understanding how attraction works with women. And let's start by talking about perceived value and the role that it plays in attracting and maintaining attraction with a woman. Because a lot of guys out there have a misunderstanding of this whole high value man thing that gets talked about all the time, at least when it comes to attracting women and maintaining attraction. And there's a crucial distinction to make between what men perceive as high value and what women perceive as high value. Men tend to put a lot of emphasis on having money, good looks, cars, status, etc., and all of those things do matter. They absolutely have a strong effect when it comes to attraction, and I endorse improving all of those areas as much as you can. But men also tend to overvalue those aspects and undervalue perceived value, which is less objective and more subjective or dynamic. And what I mean is that when it comes to each specific woman, she will subconsciously assign a level of value to you in her mind based on what she's attracted to and what she finds intriguing. And there will always be some level of vanity included in that, such as your looks, your career, your status, etc. But the important thing to remember here is that your perceived value in her eyes could be lower or higher than you think it should be. So for example, to all of us men, Tom Brady is a high value man. He's the greatest quarterback of all time. He's tall, he's a good looking dude, and he's rich. Most guys would objectively say that Tom Brady is a 10 out of 10, and it would be hard to argue that. Tom could pull most women alive right now if he wanted to, and in terms of what men value, it would be extremely difficult to do better than what he has done. However, to certain women, his perceived value may be lower than how we perceive him. So while we view him as a 10, his ex-wife Giselle might view him as a 7 in her eyes due to their personal interactions. So hypothetically speaking, when they're together behind the scenes, Tom might fold when interacting with Giselle and display a lack of emotional control or a lack of masculinity. Maybe they get into arguments easily, or he's easily swayed by her emotions. Who knows? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. And maybe she was just a bad pick from the start and that's why they ended up divorced. But in the hypothetical situation that he does display those traits, that will decrease his value in the eyes of his ex-wife because of what women value and her perceived value of him in her eyes. On the contrary, this is also why a woman can be obsessed with you when you're broke and have a car that barely runs. Other men might perceive you as a 4, but she might perceive you as an 8 due to the internal factors that women place more value on than men do. You might be broke, but you might make her feel a certain way through your actions and words that hooks her emotionally, and your internal game in masculinity may be intoxicating to her and give her an experience that she's never had before. And this is where I've noticed some guys have a blind spot when it comes to dating. They will do a lot of the self-improvement to improve their income, their looks, and all these other things, but they overlook the importance of sharpening your mindset and communication ability, which is really the backbone of attraction once you get beyond the first glance. Because think about it, if you have a top tier physique and you make great money, but your mindset is weak and you don't have any game verbally, do you really think that you're going to inspire a woman to have genuine desire for you? The answer is no, because you're going to be exposed at some point, because a woman will eventually test your character and your masculinity. Your abs in your bank account won't save you in those cases. This is amplified even more the longer a relationship with a woman goes on, because she learns your strengths and weaknesses more as time goes by. But even with short-term flings, you will fumble some women along the way because your internal game wasn't developed enough to hook her mentally and emotionally. And see, the thing is that women can overlook a face or a body that isn't perfect or an income that isn't perfect much more easily than they can overlook an unattractive mindset or a lack of masculinity. When your mindset is weak or you're lacking masculine energy, it triggers a deep disgust inside of them that is repelling on a biological level. And men often look at value through this male-focused lens of money, titles, ability, accomplishments, and looks, but all of those things can be undermined by a woman that finds holes in your mental state and your masculine frame. And every woman will attempt to do so at some point. And if you think about it further, the idea of a Chad, or what constitutes a Chad, is something that men thought of. Guys came up with this idea of what constitutes a Chad, and every time it's mentioned, it's almost always focused on the vanity aspects only. A Chad is almost never defined as being a guy with a high level of internal game. It's always the outward stuff, or the outward game, so to speak. And again, all that stuff matters, but it's not necessarily a woman's definition of a Chad. A woman's definition of a Chad is going to include other aspects, like the amount of emotional impact he has on her, his ability to lead her, and the amount of comfort he can provide by being a trustworthy leader. And the only way to inspire a woman to comfortably submit to you is by being a leader who speaks and acts like a man who can actually lead, which leads to respect. And that's the thing that will either pass or deflect her tests ahead of time when they eventually come up. Now, you may have heard somewhere that men have the burden of performance, and that's true. Simply by being a man, you've been given great power if you harness it correctly, but because of that, you have also been given great responsibility. And a part of that is the responsibility of having your behavior constantly monitored consciously and subconsciously. And what I mean by that is that a woman's attraction level for you is in a constant state of flux, depending on how you react to her and how you react to the world around you. And in a previous video, I talked about how most men are constantly chipping away at the attraction level in their relationships without even knowing it. And long-term relationships are basically dating on hard mode, and marriage is dating on nightmare mode. The reason why long-term relationships are hard mode or nightmare mode is because you are constantly exposed to this woman over time, and there are more opportunities for each person to show their unattractive traits. But from the man's side of things specifically, it's more chances for her to discover weaknesses in your masculinity and mindset. So for example, when a guy starts arguing with his girl all the time, he is eroding the attraction in that relationship by showing weakness in multiple ways. The first weakness is that he's showing that he is willing to engage and fight with a woman that wants to naturally submit to him, but can't because he is showing poor leadership qualities. So now this puts him beneath her in her eyes because she cannot trust him to fill the masculine role reliably. She has to fill that void and be the masculine one in order to establish some semblance of control and stability. The second weakness is that he is displaying a lack of emotional control, which signals that he is a bad leader. Even as a guy, if I was in a professional setting with a man who had bad emotional control, there's no way I could reliably follow that guy's lead or trust him to accomplish anything. So why would a woman trust and follow you if you're easily angered or upset? I mean, she might if she has an attachment style that has been formed by being abused in the past, but in terms of having a mentally healthy woman generate genuine desire for you, it's not going to happen if you're more volatile than she is. Because it goes back to hypergamy. If she doesn't view you as being better than her in some way, she isn't going to genuinely desire you. But to bring it back to my point about attraction always being in flux, you can never rest and just put your feet up in terms of your mindset and verbal game, because you are constantly being evaluated as life goes on. If you blow up in traffic and want to fight some old guy for cutting you off, you've just shown weakness. If a girl comes over and your place is dirty like a 5-year-old, you've just shown weakness. If you're begging her for sex, you've just shown weakness. If you engage in arguments with a girl when she's moody, you've just shown weakness by taking her too seriously. All of these types of situations erode the attraction level and your perceived value in her eyes. And that's not to say that there's no room to be a human being and make mistakes, because we all do. But the idea here is to hone in on the things that you can control and sharpen them over time to reduce your weaknesses as much as possible. Because here's the thing, everything in dating and relationships comes back to your mindset, your masculinity, and your communication ability. One of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, why many guys, including myself, say to work on your physique, your money, and all these outward things is because of the inward effects that they have. It's much easier to work on your confidence when your body looks good and you have money in the bank. It's harder to become truly confident in your masculinity when you can't even take care of yourself. So it's not the idea that big biceps simply get you women, or that having money in the bank is all you need to get girls. It's more so by having those foundational aspects covered, they aren't weaknesses that negatively impact your internal state or your internal level of game. The idea is to work on the things in your control to create as many strengths as you can, but when it comes to women, things will always come back around to having a strong masculine identity. And if you don't have a strong identity and a sense of who you are as a man and your principles that you stand on, you will eventually get crushed by every woman you attract, no matter how wealthy or how good looking you are. Without a firm identity, you just become a good looking or a wealthy target that gets used for time, attention, and resources. Because women will throw various tests at you depending on their level of respect for you, the emotional fulfillment you provide, the security they have with trusting you as a leader, and your perceived value as a whole. But one thing is for sure, every single man will be tested by every single woman given enough time with her. There's no avoiding it because it's a subconscious action on their part. Again, it doesn't matter how many cars you have or how jacked you are, your identity is going to be put to the test to see if you're really that guy with her one-on-one. And if you have a weak identity, she will be able to easily knock you off track and make you doubt or question yourself. So let me give you a real life example of this type of testing. I know a guy who is a doctor and he's married to this girl who has worked more typical retail jobs. So in terms of career or professional status, he is higher than her on the totem pole. And one night they were at dinner with a bunch of people, and while she was having a conversation, she referenced her husband as being just an ER doctor, as if being an ER doctor was somehow a negative thing or a lesser type of doctor. Now, this guy obviously has a career and income that would be considered high value by most standards, and this woman, benefiting directly from the hard work that he has done and being lower in status than him, still had the audacity to test him in front of everyone by attempting to redefine his identity as a lesser version of who he is. She attempted to knock down his value as a way of testing his resolve, and let me add that she clearly has a very low perceived value of this man overall to even do something like that in front of people to start with. Not every woman is going to have that level of dirtbag behavior, but the point I want to make with that example is that on the outside you have a man that has high perceived value by other men in society, but on the inside of that relationship, her perceived value of him is low. Therefore, the tests increase and her attempts at reshaping his identity increases. Now, a man with strong masculine resolve would never marry a woman like that to start with, but even if he did, she wouldn't have the balls to test him like that in front of other people due to a higher level of respect and perceived value. It would be a completely different dynamic, and the only difference would be the internal game, not the outward. A better jawline or an extra $100,000 every year wouldn't provide the guy with the ability to deflect those tests or prevent them from happening to start with. It can only be done through strong identity, emotional intelligence, and masculine frame. And there might be a guy watching this saying, man, this sounds like you're just overanalyzing things, there can't be this much to it. But there really is a lot to it in terms of understanding how all the pieces work together. And this is why so many guys will hit landmines along the way with a girl, their perceived value in her eyes declines, she leaves, and then they're left upset and confused at what happened. You have to be aware of the dynamic that is going on between you and another woman. And you start to internalize these concepts into a simple way of living over time, but it first takes being made aware of the cause and effect of what's occurring in front of you as a result of your actions and words, and then streamlining that through practice and experience into a way of living that just comes second nature to you. But some of the core concepts to understand here are this. Number one, you're never going to be skipped for testing no matter how cool the woman is. At some point, she's going to test your resolve, and that increases if you appear to lack leadership and masculine qualities. Her happiness will decrease, and then her level of frustration will increase. If she gets to a point where she has lost respect for you, it's generally time in most cases to just abandon ship and start over somewhere else, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to ever fully recover respect. The second thing is that outer game and vanity-based qualities you bring to the table are important, but everything always comes back to your internal game and state of being. You can get by with less money or looks, but you will never get by with weak masculinity, a weak mindset, and lacking verbal game. You will always be exposed at some point and exploited. And your perceived value is the factor that affects you the most rather than any value that other men assign to you. Men might think you're a god, but other women might walk all over you and see you as a mark. Or on the contrary, some men might think you're a 4 or a 5, but other women think you're an 8. It depends on what she values and what she sees behind closed doors that no one else sees, which is where your game is truly tested. Also, your perceived value is constantly in flux based on how you react to life in general and her. If you can have your identity influenced by outside sources or have your masculinity affected by outside pressure, including her, your perceived value will decline over time. And lastly, it's not about being perfect with all of this. You're still a human. It's just about getting it right more often than not over time. And the more you increase that rate of making the right decisions and choices, the more you passively increase your perceived value and reap the rewards of it. Anyway, make sure to check out the links in the description to see some of the things I have to offer. Check out this video next, and I will see you in the next one.